Hello everyone, my name is Brandon, and you may recognize me from the channel Brandon F. While I primarily focus on educational content surrounding the long 18th century, today I have been graciously invited by our ever-beneficent host Brody to give a brief presentation on the Ant Olympics. I understand that he's been quite busy putting them all together, and so I am here to shed a little bit of background knowledge on it all, if you will. Now, the Ant Olympics, in stark contrast to their lesser cousin, the regular Olympics, are not in fact a Greek tradition, but go back to the Roman tradition, and particularly the good Emperor Brodicus. Brodicus was adequate, to say the best, I suppose we could put it. He did have many successful military campaigns, but he had problems really, so to say, seeing himself in the grander scheme of history. He thought that he wasn't really up to the same level as his predecessors. And indeed, if we look to the histories, it actually does seem to be the case a little bit that Brodicus' own military successes weren't so much due to his own mastermind, but more unfortunately due to the aid of his advisors and lesser generals beneath him. And to put it in a way that at least I suppose can relate to many of yourselves, he had sort of some self-esteem issues. He wasn't really confident in his own abilities. And unfortunately, this lack of confidence in his own skill really did manifest itself after his campaigning when he came back home. So it was actually during his military triumph, which is to say the grand and lavish military parade which is held after a campaign in the Roman times, where they show off all the, the captured loot and wealth and whatnot, all their slaves they've got and things like that. They enter a grand procession into the city. It was actually during that triumph that many of the individuals in the crowd mistook one of Brodicus's chief advisors for himself. Brodicus was at the top of the cherry and everything. He was like, "Hi everyone, it's me," but he was a little shorter than average, and a lot of other people were expecting someone more physically imposing, and so a lot of them unfortunately looked to the guy right next to him. Big gap, as it were, big embarrassment. About 3,000 people were actually crucified as a result of it, but that's beside the point. The entire idea being that Brodicus is a little self-conscious about himself, and so what is he going to do? He's going to host some games, and he is going to be not merely the emperor sitting in the chair gazing down upon them and saying, "Oh yes, I put them on, so worship me." No, rather, he is going to be the star, the centerpiece of those games. And of course, what is the most iconic aspect of any era of Roman gaming, but of course, the wild animal fights and other sporting events involving them. Brodicus determined that if he was going to win back the hearts and minds of his people through martial prowess and physical impressiveness, well then naturally he must be the one, not a gladiator, not some slave. He must be the one to be in the pits fighting the beasts himself. Now, naturally, he was the emperor, of course, so you can't expect him to go in there all on his own, lest he should lose his life. So naturally, whenever he went into the pit, he was with a rather substantial number of his Praetorian guards surrounding, just in case something went wrong. Of course, he knew that he wasn't going to need them. Or at least that's what the plan was. The first night of the games would see him facing off against, of course, that most iconic of beasts, the North African lion. He entered into the pit. The lion gate opened up. And the beast was actually kind of just laying there for a little bit. Lions actually aren't that aggressive is the thing. But they poked and prodded a little bit, and they managed to get it on to actually fight him. The battle was, I'd like to say, long and arduous and hard fought and everything. It was actually over pretty quickly. The lion sort of pounced on him a little bit, and just before it was about to tear his face off into shreds, Praetorian managed to rush forward with a pike and spear the thing. So unfortunately, Brodicus was once again left kind of wanting in terms of his performance. The next day, he decided maybe we should probably scale it down a little bit. We'll work our way back up to the lion. And his advisor said, "Oh, yeah, that's your excellency, very good idea." So next it was going to be a leopard. Unfortunately, something much similar took place. Now, this pattern would continue for quite some time, about 2.5 weeks. In fact, every single night, the animals getting smaller and more pathetic until Brodicus would be able to actually best it in the field of combat. And every night, of course, Brodicus's self-esteem getting all the more lower and lower. In fact, every single night, when the audience, had the misfortune of maybe breaking a chuckle or a laugh at his performance, again, we saw more and more crucifixions lining the road. But in any case, eventually on the 18th night it was, in fact, Brodicus finally found a beast that he could triumph against. He was walking through his gardens, having his daily cry, of course, when he happened to realize that as he stepped forward onto the ground, he heard a bit of a crunching noise. He looked down and he realized that he had stepped on a piece of crusty old bread. But then he noticed something even closer. On that bread there was a collection of these little black dots, little spindly creatures crawling all about, eating and devouring the thing. Curious, he went down closer and he saw the thing covered in hordes and hordes of black ants. And he got an idea. He stood back up, widening his shoulders, lifting his chin a little bit, realizing, I am the Emperor. And he smashed the ants into millions of pieces below his heel. By God, finally the Emperor felt the surge of power, the masculine prowess, the martial ability which belonged to his predecessors. He turned around and he looked to his Praetorian Guard, and he smirked, because he knew that he would no longer need them. He had found the enemy which even he could best in combat. The next day, the Ant Olympics were born. The gates opened wide, and the guards brought out a mighty palanquin filled to the brim with black ants. And when the guards spilled out a horde of ants onto the ground, and the emperor, clad in his shimmering armor and wearing the lion's mane of Alexander the Great, one of those people, strode forth with his mighty blade, and he began stabbing into the ground repeatedly, killing the ants, slaughtering them one by one, until after 15 solid hours, it is said, he was swinging that sword arm, every last ant was destroyed. The audience was quickly roused from their slumber by the guards prodding them along the way, and a rapturous applause was commenced for the emperor, and chanting of his name, Brodicus, 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 you've done it again, or for the first time, whatever. They said something along those lines. You get the idea. And finally, Brodicus knew that he had found his calling. The next year, the Emperor Brodicus would instill the same event, and this time it was far more than simply the famed ant fights, but indeed they introduced the ant chariot races. Needed an awful lot of ants to actually get the things to go, but all the same, it was very impressive when they managed to make it work. The next day, they included ant versus ant fighting, and so on and so forth, every single year for 3 solid years. In fact, the Ant Olympics, as they came to be known, were the most famed event empire-wide. In the 4th year, Emperor Brodicus was stabbed to death by his own Praetorian guards because he slept upon the guards' sisters, but that's beside the point. Indeed, a legend had been born, and now, of course, we come to our own most humble servant of Brody. He is preparing his own Ant Olympics. Now, whether or not, of course, our good friend is going to be bringing up the old and storied traditions and reliving the Ant Olympics of old, or whether he shall be introducing new fusionary ideals and sort of reinventing the Ant Olympics in his own mind, well, all of that has yet to be seen. But one thing is certain: the Ant Olympics will be having a most magnificent and triumphal return, at least when finally that question is answered, the one that we've all had on bated lips, bated breath, whatever the expression is. For the love of God, Brody, when are you coming back? Thank you all so very much for watching, and of course, until the next time, my dear viewers, I am and I shall remain your most humble and obedient of servants. Oh God, what have I done?